Well, hey, all you wiretappers out there. Gary Jenkins, retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective, here back in the studio with a little bonus episode of Gangland Wire. And I've been doing a bunch of Chicago stuff, as you know. Well, here's one more before I stray away from Chicago. I had been away from Chicago for a long time, and I missed it. I missed you guys up there. And, here's another thing before I really get started in this story. I'm on a mission right now. I remembered an old story about Tony Accardo had a 1950s Mercedes SL, and I think it was a gull wing, but I'm not sure. It was a 300 SL. He for sure had a 1950s Mercedes red sports car. And I always wondered, I wondered what happened to that car. I ought to be able to run that down. I interviewed a guy recently about an investigation into finding an extremely rare exotic car that was worth like $25 million or something. It was a teardrop German-made, something about a Talbot Lago or some name like that. Anyhow, so it got me thinking, and they were talking about running down the cars and the history on cars, the Provence on cars, and they said when you have a really good story attached to a car, it makes it worth a whole lot more money than normal. And I called up a friend of mine that wheels and deals in classic cars through Meekums, and I think there's another auto auction. He said, "Oh yeah," he said, "Man, you can find that car." If Ed hadn't already had that priced into it, the fact that Tony Accardo sold it or owned it, then it would be worth a whole lot more money. So I thought, well, let's just see if we can't find that car. I started looking into it, and these 1950s Mercedes 300 SLs, there wasn't very many of them made. There was only a couple of thousand of them made in over several years' time. And best I could tell, they're all accounted for in some manner. I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet. I started asking around and trying to find people that could help me with sources on that. So if you know anybody that's a real expert on these old Mercedes sports cars, send them to me. Have them email me at ganglandwire@gmail.com or something like that. And if you are, or give me a call, 816-931-3535. I just think it would be fun to find it. I'd do a little show on it if I found it and find out what happened to it. Now, it might make somebody really happy we can find it, and he didn't know that it was Tony Accardo's old car. Now, these old VINs, now they're 17 digits. Well, back then they were like 6 or 7 digits, and to trace it through the VIN, that old a car with no more than I have to go on right now, it's just almost impossible. I need to narrow down that maybe somebody has a story about who had it, and try to find that person, and then work down from there. If maybe that person still has it, I don't know, but it would be a fun little. It's going to be a fun little project. But anyhow, let's go up to Chicago in the 1970s. You were rocking and rolling up there in Chicago. The outfit ruled. We just had all that information from Bob Cooley and all the things that he did and he was involved in up there. And they owned the city. They damn near owned the whole city. So there's one guy named Frank Schweihs. Now, you may have heard of Frank Schweihs. He was called the German, Frank the German Schweihs. He was a guy that Red Wilmette, who has his show, can't even think of the name of it anymore. He had a show with Adam out in Las Vegas. Red Wilmette, he kind of went into the employ of the FBI. Nobody really had a case on him. He was just tired of him shaking him down, so he volunteered, and Frank Schweihs was coming around extorting money from me, and he had a dirty bookstore or something like that in Old Town. Frank Schweihs had a restaurant in Old Town. Frank Schweihs started coming around, and Red Wilmette let the bureau wire up his TV so it had a camera and a microphone in it, and it recorded all kinds of information about Frank Schweihs, and they ended up convicting him of extorting money from Red Wilmette. He was also a defendant in the family secrets trial, and I think Red testified in that. Frank Schweihs, he had gotten introduced to a IRS agent named Johnson, but he was going under the name Virgil Williams. Now, Virgil Williams, we're just going to call him Virgil Williams. He was a black dude. He was a big black dude, looked like a former, defensive tackle for the Chicago Bears or something. And he had started out, the IRS had put him undercover, working the South Side and working policy back in the earlier 60s. And somehow he got introduced to Frank Schweihs as this guy who was, involved in gambling and involved in the rackets in some manner on the south side and the black rackets. Frank was trying to sell him his restaurant in Old Town. Of course, he was trying to rip him off is what he was trying to do. You don't just do business with a guy like Frank Schweihs. You do not do business with him. If you start going down that path, what he's going to do, he's going to rip you off in some manner. Guy started telling stories about later on. He's in at the trial, and around that time he's interviewed, and he started telling stories about working with Frank. He said Frank and he would sit around the restaurant and talk and drink, and Frank would say, worrying about undercover agents, and he said, yeah, he said, I can spot him a mile off. He said, no undercover's ever going to get close to me. He said, I can just hear, I can pick out who's going up and down the street out there and who's an undercover agent. He'd point out people. Of course, this guy knew that they really weren't undercover agents, but he would act like, oh yeah, you're really cool, Frank. You're a guy I need to do business with. You know what time it is. He said at one time, Frank told him, he said, I wish that us whites were as aggressive and violent as you blacks are. He said, the guy said, I almost choked on that. He said, who's more violent than Frank Schweihs? And he worked for Joey the Clown Lombardo, and Harry Edelman was in that mix, and the Wild Bunch. And I mean, who's more violent and vicious than those guys? I don't think anybody. But he thought that blacks were really had it going on when it came to the violence thing. It was a hell of a story. He also, after he got done, he didn't have much more on Frank, but talked about he was trying to. He got in. Frank probably hooked him up with this a guy named Herman K. And he told him that he would buy a building from him, and actually the building was owned by Goodwill Industries, and this Herman K. was kind of a high-ranking person in Goodwill Industries, and he was going to sell it for $325,000 in cash. He said, Johnson walked in, he said, I just dumped $325,000 in cash right on his desk. And so this guy said, oh, no, we can't do that, because he was fronting himself off as like a black dope dealer that had just tons of cash. He said, we can't do it like that. We got to figure out how to get that in a check, and then you got to pay me so much under the table. And so they ended up making a case on this guy for ripping over $400,000 off in a series of real estate deals in which the Goodwill Industries are the victim. Now, who would rip off Goodwill? I mean, who would you go in and shoplift from Goodwill? I think this guy probably would. He was an employee. It's crazy. I mean, these are just a few little stories of the outfit in 1970 Chicago. Johnson said he recalled one day he went into the office of a North suburban mayor, started talking to him about getting something done, said he was a businessman from Chicago, and he wanted to start a bar, and he wanted to have gambling and prostitution in it, and he needed some protection. And the guy asked him for $2,000, and he said, okay, I can handle that. And he said, the guy also warned him. He said, he said, if you aren't who you say you are, I won't send my police down there to take care of you. I'll take care of you myself. Now, the mayor never really figured out after they ended up doing him now. During this time also, the IRS agent kept telling the German that he couldn't really close a deal on the restaurant that Frank was going to sell him. He said because there was a politician that was holding up the licensing process on it, and Frank Schweihs, he didn't say who it was, but Frank Schweihs decided it must be a guy named George Dunn, who was a Cook County commissioner, and really could have been a successor to Richard Daley, and he was really heavy into Cook County politics, and I believe he was the one who was holding up the transaction, and Frank wanted to bomb his car. The guy said, no, we'll get this worked out, and then they ended up taking the whole thing down before anything happened. But it was a hell of an undercover investigation this guy had. So thanks a lot, guys. Just another little story about the Chicago outfit. Oh, and don't forget, I've got my book, Windy City Mafia, the Chicago Outfit. It is on Amazon. And just go to run Gary Jenkins Mafia on Amazon, Mafia Books on Amazon. You'll find all my books. And I've got a bunch of interesting little stories I've done on the podcast that are in this book. It especially makes a nice gift for somebody that is interested in Chicago outfit. It's not very much. And I just wanted to let you know about that. I don't usually try to sell. Sometimes I try to sell a lot. Sometimes I don't try to sell at all. It's kind of a hit or miss with me. If I did this to earn money with, I'd be screwed anyhow. I just do it for the love of doing it. So thanks a lot, guys, and don't forget about that red Mercedes, the little red Mercedes car. We got to find that red Mercedes of Tony Accardo's. It's got to be out there somewhere. You just don't junk out a car like that. So thanks, guys.